The scent of rain-soaked earth and pine clung to the air, a familiar comfort Lena had learned to cherish. It was a scent of safety, of home. Here, in the secluded village of Oakhaven, she was not the blind Omega, the flawed Omen. She was just Lena, the storyteller, the mother of a bright-eyed boy who was the center of her world. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime had passed since the cold stone floor of the great hall had pressed against her knees, since the collective gasp of 1,000 wolves had echoed in her ears. A flawed omen, Alpha King Alaric had declared, his voice a torrent of ice and steel that had shattered her soul. The moon goddess has tested us with a broken mate. I reject her. The words were branded onto her memory, a constant dull ache behind her ribs. She had been led away, her family's shame a heavy cloak around her shoulders. Cast out, disgraced, she had wandered until she found this place, a haven tucked away in the neutral territories between the great packs. And here, she had discovered she was not alone. She carried a piece of the king who had discarded her. "Mama?" A small voice pulled her from the past. "Finn." She turned her head, her sightless eyes facing the sound of his light footsteps on the wooden floor of their cottage. "I'm here, my little wolf." A small body collided with her legs, and she wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his soft, dark hair. He smelled of sunshine and mischief. He was 4 years old, a whirlwind of energy and questions, and the sole reason her shattered heart had bothered to keep beating. "Tell me the story of the Star Whisperer again," he pleaded, his voice muffled against her skirt. Lena smiled, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of his face. "Again? You'll have it memorized better than I do soon." She loved telling stories. It was how she painted pictures for herself and for others, weaving worlds from sound and scent and feeling. In her stories, the outcasts were heroes, and the things others called weaknesses were the greatest of strengths. She settled into her rocking chair by the hearth, pulling Finn into her lap. His small, warm weight was the most real thing in her universe. As she began to speak, her voice soft and rhythmic, she let the tale of a girl who could hear the secrets of the stars wash away the ghosts of the past. For a little while, at least. She was safe. They were safe. The ruthless king of Stonefang was a world away, a dark memory in a life she had painstakingly rebuilt from ashes. She had no idea that the world she had built was about to be threatened by the very man who had forced her to create it. King Alaric stood on the highest battlement of his fortress, the wind whipping his dark cloak around him. The air was thin and carried a scent of decay that had become sickeningly familiar. Below him, the lands of the Dominion of Stonefang stretched out, a patchwork of dying fields and withering forests. The blight. It had started subtly 5 years ago, a creeping sickness at the edges of his territory. Now, it choked the heart of his kingdom. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin, a caged beast snarling at an enemy it could not see or fight. They were a people of strength, of martial pride. Their power was tied to the land, and as the land weakened, so did they. Pups were being born smaller, their shifts delayed. The vibrant life force of his pack was draining away, and he, their king, was powerless to stop it. He slammed a gauntleted fist against the cold stone. Guilt was a poison he swallowed daily. His advisors, led by his uncle, Lord Marius, whispered that it was a curse, a punishment from the goddess for some unseen failure of their king. Alaric knew what that failure was. He saw it every time he closed his eyes. A young woman with a cascade of pale hair, her eyes a milky, sightless blue, kneeling before him. A broken mate. He had rejected her. He had listened to Marius, who had insisted that accepting a flawed Omega, a blind one, would be the final crack in their kingdom's foundation. It would be an admission of weakness they could not afford. And so, He had spoken the words of rejection, severing the sacred bond and casting her out. The blight had begun within a moon cycle of her departure. Coincidence, Marius had claimed. Alaric was no longer so sure. "My king." Alaric turned. His beta, Gareth, stood a respectful distance away, his expression grim. "What is it?" "Scouts have returned from the Whisperwood borderlands," Gareth said, his voice low. "The blight has not touched the villages there. They speak of a woman, a storyteller. Some call her a healer. They say the land around her thrives." Hope was a dangerous, unfamiliar sensation. Alaric had crushed it within himself years ago, but desperation was a powerful motivator. "A healer?" "It is likely just peasant superstition, my lord," Gareth added quickly, "but the reports are consistent. The village of Oakhaven is untouched, healthy." Alaric stared out at his dying kingdom. Superstition or not, it was a thread, and he would pull on it with all his remaining strength. "Prepare my horse. We ride at dawn. I will see this healer for myself." He would not take a royal contingent, just himself and Gareth. This was a mission born of desperation, not of state. He had to know if this was a final, desperate chance at salvation, or just another false dawn in his unending night. The strangers arrived as the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the village green. Lena was packing away the small wooden toys she used for her stories when a hush fell over the children playing nearby. Her senses, always acute, went on high alert. The air shifted, growing heavy with a power that did not belong in Oakhaven. It was predatory, ancient, and achingly familiar. Two men on massive war horses stood at the edge of the village. One was clearly a warrior, broad and watchful. But it was the other who stole the breath from her lungs. His presence was a physical force, a crushing weight of authority and barely contained violence. Even from a distance, she could feel the raw power radiating from him, a scent like ozone before a lightning strike, mixed with the cold hardness of granite. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It can't be. Finn, who had been chasing a butterfly, suddenly ran to her, his small hand gripping her skirt. "Mama, the big man is sad," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Lena knelt, pulling him close. Her son had always been sensitive, able to perceive emotions in others with an unnerving clarity, a gift, she suspected, inherited from her. "Stay with me, little one," she murmured, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. The village elder, a kind man named Elias, approached the newcomers cautiously. Lena listened, her head tilted, straining to catch their words over the frantic beating of her own heart. The second man, the warrior, spoke first, his voice a low rumble. But then the other man spoke, and the world tilted on its axis. "We are looking for a healer, a woman they call the storyteller." The voice, deeper, harsher, worn down by years of command, but unmistakably the same. The sound that had both built her dreams and torn them to shreds. Alaric. Panic seized her. She scooped Finn into her arms, his small frame a fragile shield. She had to run. She had to hide. He could not see Finn. He could not know. She turned, intending to flee into the familiar shadows of her cottage, but it was too late. He was already moving toward them, his heavy boots sounding a death knell on the packed earth. He stopped before her, so close she could feel the heat rolling off him. The scent of him, pine, steel, and that unique, wild scent of his wolf, overwhelmed her. It was the scent of her mate, the mate who had rejected her. "You are the storyteller?" he demanded. His voice was devoid of warmth, a tool of command. Lena could not speak. She could only clutch her son tighter, her face turned away, hoping the shadows of the dusk would obscure her features, hoping he would not look too closely. But he did. There was a sharp intake of breath. You. And then, his attention shifted. It fell from her face to the small boy in her arms, who was now peeking out from the safety of her shoulder. Finn, bless his innocent heart, was not afraid. He was curious. He looked directly at the terrifying king. Lena felt Alaric freeze. The air crackled with sudden, unbearable tension. She didn't need to see to know what had happened. She knew what he was looking at. He was looking into the face of his son. He was seeing his own eyes staring back at him. A choked sound escaped Alaric's throat. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any shout. It was the sound of a king's world breaking apart. In that silence, Lena knew her peaceful life was over. The past had found her, and it wore a crown. Alaric felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under him. The boy. The child in the blind woman's arms. He had silver-gray eyes. Not just gray, but the specific, startling shade of molten silver that was the unmistakable mark of his royal bloodline. Eyes that were a perfect mirror of his own. He stared, his mind refusing to process what his senses were screaming at him, the woman holding the boy. He looked back at her, truly looking this time. The pale hair, the delicate line of her jaw, the scent of wildflowers and crushed herbs that was uniquely hers. It was faint, masked by time and sorrow, but his wolf knew it, recognized it. Mate. Lena. The blind Omega he had cast away 5 years ago. And the boy. A child of 4, maybe 5 years. The timeline slammed into him with the force of a battering ram. What is his name? Alaric's voice was a raw, broken thing, unrecognizable even to himself. Lena flinched, pulling the boy tighter against her. She remained silent, her body a fortress of defiance. Her fear was a palpable wave in the air, but beneath it, he could sense a deep, unyielding strength that he had been too arrogant to see all those years ago. Gareth moved to his side, his own shock evident in his wide eyes. My king. Alaric held up a hand, silencing him. His world had narrowed to this woman and the child who was so clearly his flesh and blood. An heir. An heir he had abandoned in the wilderness. The guilt he had carried for 5 years was a flickering candle compared to the inferno now raging in his chest. The blight. His dying kingdom. It all felt like a just punishment. He is my son, Alaric stated. It was not a question. It was a fact that settled into his bones with the weight of absolute truth. Lena finally spoke, her voice trembling but laced with steel. He is my son. You gave up any right to him when you cast me aside. Her words were a blade to his heart, and he knew he deserved the wound. But the sight of his son, healthy and vibrant in a world where his own people were sickening, changed everything. And the fact that this village, her home, was untouched by the blight. It couldn't be a coincidence. Whether she was a healer or a witch, she was the key. And the boy was his. He hardened his heart, falling back on the only thing he knew. Command. The king replaced the man. You and the boy will come with me. You will return to Stonefang. No, Lena whispered, shaking her head. We will not. This is our home. That was not a request, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. My kingdom is dying. You are living on land that is healthy. You will come back, and you will fix what is wrong, and my son will take his rightful place. His place is with his mother, she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. His place is with his father and his king, Alaric countered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He was a monster, he knew it. He was tearing this small family apart, dragging her back to the place of her greatest humiliation. But his desperation was a gaping maw, swallowing his honor. He needed her. He needed to understand the blight. And more than anything, a primal, possessive part of him he hadn't known existed, needed his son. He gestured to Gareth. "See that they are made ready." "We leave within the hour." He turned his back on her then, unable to bear the look of shattered betrayal on her face, even though he could not see it with his eyes. He could feel it. He had broken her once before. Now, he was doing it all over again. The journey back to Stonefang was a silent torture. Lena rode on a placid mare with Finn seated before her, his small body a warm anchor in a sea of misery. King Alaric and his beta, Gareth, rode on either side, their presence a constant, oppressive weight. They were not captors in the traditional sense. There were no ropes or chains. But she was a prisoner all the same, bound by the king's will and the terrible truth of her son's parentage. She had fought, of course. She had pleaded with the village elder Elias, but he had merely shaken his head, his face etched with sorrow. "He is the king, Lena. We cannot defy him. He could destroy us all." And so, she had been forced to pack a small bag, leaving behind the only home Finn had ever known, the only place she had ever felt safe. As they rode, she focused on her senses, trying to ground herself. The rhythmic clip-clop of hooves, the leathery scent of the saddles, the cool air that promised a swift descent into night. Alaric did not speak to her. He rode in a grim silence, his posture rigid. But she could feel the turmoil rolling off him. It was a confusing mix of guilt, anger, and a strange, raw possessiveness that was directed entirely at Finn. Finn, for his part, was quiet. He clung to Lena, but his gaze often strayed to the dark, powerful figure of his father. He was not afraid, but wary, his young mind trying to piece together the sudden, violent shift in their lives. After hours of riding, they stopped to make camp. Gareth started a fire while Alaric tended to the horses. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. "Why are you doing this?" Lena finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alaric stopped what he was doing, his back still to her. "I told you. My lands are blighted, my people are sick. Your village is not. You will help us." "I am no healer," she insisted. "I tell stories. That is all." He turned then, and she felt his intense gaze on her. "And yet, you live on a patch of earth that thrives while my kingdom dies. You will explain." That he paused, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "And he, the boy, he is my heir. He belongs at the keep." "He belongs where he is loved and safe," she retorted, her courage fueled by maternal fire. "Not in a court that values strength above all else, a court that would have seen his mother cast out for a perceived flaw." The truth of her words hung in the air between them. Alaric had no response. He looked away, his jaw tight. He saw Finn watching them, his silver eyes wide in the firelight. The king's shoulders slumped, a flicker of the immense burden he carried. For a moment, he wasn't a king. He was just a man staring at the wreckage of a choice he'd made long ago. "Eat," he said, his voice gruff as he pushed a plate of rations toward her. "We have a long ride ahead of us." It was a retreat, not a victory. Lena ate in silence, her mind racing. She was trapped, heading toward a place of nightmares. But she was not the same broken girl who had been cast out 5 years ago. She was a mother, and she would burn his entire kingdom to the ground before she let him harm her son. The fortress of Stonefang was exactly as Lena remembered it, a place of cold, unyielding stone that seemed to swallow the light. As they passed through the massive gates, she could feel the blight she had only heard about. It was a palpable sickness in the air, a scent of dust and decay that clung to everything. The very stones beneath her feet felt weary, grieving. Whispers followed them through the courtyards. "The blind Omega. She has returned. And the boy? Look at his eyes. The stares were like physical blows, and Lena pulled Finn closer, shielding him as best she could. Alaric led them not to the dungeons, as she had feared, but to a suite of rooms in the royal wing. They were luxurious, with plush carpets and a warm fire crackling in the hearth, but they felt like a gilded cage. "You will be comfortable here," Alaric stated, his voice formal. "Guards will be posted outside, for your protection." Lena knew it was also to prevent her escape. "And what is it you expect me to do, my lord?" she asked, the title tasting like poison on her tongue. "I expect you to find the source of this blight and end it," he said. "You will have access to whatever you need. The libraries, the gardens, the land itself." He hesitated, his gaze falling to Finn, who was looking around the grand room with a child's awe. "He will be given tutors. He will be trained as a prince of the Dominion." "He is a child, not a prince," Lena said softly. "He needs stories and sunshine, not swordmasters and strategists." A flicker of something, pain, regret, crossed Alaric's face before it was shuttered away. "He is both. And he will have both." With that, he turned and left, the heavy door closing behind him with a definitive thud. Lena sank onto a velvet chaise, pulling Finn into her lap. "Are we prisoners, Mama?" he asked, his small voice echoing in the large room. "No, my love," she lied, stroking his hair. "We are guests." The next few days were a strange purgatory. Servants brought them food and clothing, all of them treating her with a mixture of fear and pity. Alaric visited daily, his interactions stiff and formal. He would ask about her progress with the blight, and she would tell him the same thing. The land is not sick. It is poisoned. It grieves a great lie. He never understood. He would scowl and demand a more practical explanation, a scientific cause. He could not grasp the language of feeling she spoke so fluently. His focus was always on Finn. He would try to engage the boy, showing him wooden soldiers or maps of the kingdom. Finn was polite but distant, always retreating to Lena's side. The king's frustration was a palpable thing, a storm brewing just off the coast. One evening, Alaric found her in the small walled garden attached to their suite. The plants here were also withered, the soil dry and lifeless. Lena was kneeling, her hands pressed flat against the earth. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice startling her. "Listening," she replied simply. He scoffed. "Listening to dirt?" "The stone and soil of this place have a memory," she explained, not looking at him. "They remember joy and sorrow, truth and deceit. The poison that sickens your land is not in the water or the air. It is a lie, a deep foundational lie that has taken root here and is choking the life from everything." Alaric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tight. "My uncle, Lord Marius, is the High Chancellor. He has studied ancient texts on agriculture and pack magic. He believes it is an elemental curse, perhaps from a rival pack." Lena's head snapped up at the mention of the name. She remembered Lord Marius, a thin, cold man with a voice like whispering parchment. He had been the one standing behind the throne when Alaric had rejected her, his eyes glittering with triumph. A sudden, chilling certainty washed over her. "The lie," she whispered, more to herself than to him, "is very close to the throne." Lord Marius watched from the shadows of a stone colonnade as the Alpha King attempted to play with the boy in the training yard. The child, Finn, was a startling replica of Alaric, a constant, galling reminder of the Omega's return. This was a complication Marius had not foreseen. He had believed the woman long dead or lost, her weakness purged from the Dominion. Instead, she was here, living in the royal wing, whispering poison into the king's ear. The land grieves a lie, theatrical nonsense. But Alaric, desperate and guilt-ridden, was listening. Marius had spent 5 years carefully nurturing the blight, using forbidden blood magic drawn from ancient heretical texts. The rituals were subtle, a slow poisoning of the ley lines that ran beneath the fortress. It was a masterpiece of attrition, designed to weaken Alaric's rule, to make the pack doubt his strength and his blessing from the goddess. When the time was right, Marius would offer the cure, exposing a fabricated culprit and seizing power as the kingdom's savior. The return of the blind Omega and her whelp threatened everything. Her presence was reawakening the dormant mate bond in Alaric, a connection Marius had worked so hard to sever. He saw it in the way the king's eyes followed her, the way his defenses seemed to lower, ever so slightly, when she was near. A troubling development, is it not? Marius turned. It was Gareth, the king's loyal dog. His face was a mask of neutrality, but Marius could see the suspicion in his eyes. The king's desperation has led him to embrace superstition, Marius said smoothly, his voice a silken rasp. He brings a disgraced Omega back to court, hoping for a miracle. It is a sign of weakness. Or a sign that he is finally willing to consider that he was wrong, Gareth countered, his gaze unwavering. The boy is the king's son. That changes things. It changes nothing, Marius hissed, his composure slipping for a fraction of a second. He is the son of a flawed vessel. His blood may be royal, but it is tainted by his mother's weakness. He can never truly be a worthy heir. Gareth's eyes narrowed. You were the one who counseled the king to reject her. You called her a curse. And was I wrong? Marius gestured to the gray, withered leaves of a nearby oak. The blight began after she was sent away. She is an ill omen. Her return will only hasten our demise. She has likely come back to finish what she started. He was planting seeds of doubt, a skill he had honed to a fine art. He saw the uncertainty flicker in Gareth's expression. Good. The more chaos and suspicion he could sow, the better. He left the beta standing there and made his way back to his own chambers, his mind racing. The woman's talk of lies and poison was dangerously close to the truth. She possessed some kind of primitive, intuitive sense that made her a threat. She and the boy had to be removed. Not banished this time. Permanently. A tragic accident, perhaps. A poisoning, blamed on a disgruntled servant. He needed to accelerate his plans. The king was becoming unpredictable. The Omega had to die. And the boy with her. Only then would the throne be truly within his grasp. Alaric found himself drawn to Lena's chambers more and more often. He told himself it was to monitor her progress, to demand answers about the blight. But that was a lie. He came to see his son. He came to be near her. The mate bond, which he had tried to kill with his rejection, was stirring. It was a dull, persistent ache in his soul, a phantom limb that was slowly regaining feeling. Being near her was both a comfort and a torture. He saw the strength in her he had once mistaken for weakness. Her blindness was not a deficiency. It had honed her other senses into something extraordinary. She navigated the world with a grace and certainty that humbled him. One evening, he entered her rooms to find her telling Finn a story. He paused in the doorway, unseen, and listened. She was not just speaking words, she was weaving a tapestry of sound and emotion. Her voice rose and fell, creating heroes and monsters, sunlight and shadow in the small space of the room. Finn was utterly captivated, his silver eyes wide with wonder. She was telling a story about a king whose heart had turned to stone because he was afraid to feel. He had built high walls around his kingdom and his heart, believing it would keep him safe. But the walls only kept the warmth out, and everything inside began to wither and die. Alaric felt a flush of shame. The story was about him. She was speaking the truth of his life in a way no advisor or courtier ever dared. He cleared his throat, And the story stopped abruptly. Lena's head turned toward him, her expression unreadable. Finn scrambled off the bed and ran to her side, a silent protector. "I did not mean to interrupt," Alaric said, his voice rough. "You are the king." "You interrupt as you please," she replied, a cool edge to her tone. He ignored the barb. "I wanted to ask you about what you said. About the lie." Lena was silent for a moment, her fingers stroking Finn's hair. "A lie told to a king can become a kingdom's truth. If you build your house on a cracked foundation, eventually the whole structure will collapse." "What lie?" he demanded, his patience fraying. "Be plain with me, woman. No more riddles." "The lie that weakness is something to be discarded," she said softly, but her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. "The lie that perfection equals strength. The lie that a bond given by the goddess herself can be a curse." She took a shaky breath. "The lie you were told about me." He had no answer. He could not defend himself because he knew she was right. Marius's words echoed in his memory, persuasive and poisonous. "She will weaken your line. The pack will see her as a sign that your power is failing. You must be ruthless. Cut out the weakness before it spreads." He had been a fool, a proud, terrified fool. "My uncle," he began, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. "He has advised my family for generations. He has always been loyal." "Is it loyalty to advise a man to sever his own soul?" Lena asked, her voice filled with a sorrow that was not just for herself, but for him. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Alaric looked at his son, who was watching him with an unnerving intelligence in his silver eyes. He saw the family he could have had, the happiness he had thrown away. And he began to wonder, for the first time, if the greatest. Lena's senses were screaming. For days, a wrongness had been growing within the castle walls, a subtle dissonance that grated on her nerves. It was centered, she was sure, on Lord Marius. His scent was acrid with deceit, and the very air around him felt thin and sharp, like fractured glass. She knew she couldn't convince Alaric with feelings and metaphors. He was a man of action and proof. She needed something more. Late one night, when the castle was quiet and Finn was sleeping soundly in the adjoining room, she slipped out of her chambers. The guards Alaric had posted were a comfort and a curse, but she had learned their patterns. Using the soft soles of her slippers to muffle her steps, she moved through the darkened hallways, a ghost guided not by sight, but by a strange pull of energy. The pull led her down, deep into the bowels of the fortress, to a section of the castle that was old and rarely used. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of dust and something else, something metallic and bitter. The feeling of wrongness was a physical pressure here, making it hard to breathe. She followed the feeling to a heavy ironwood door. It was locked, but the energy she was tracking seeped from beneath it, a cold and malevolent draft. Placing her hands on the ancient wood, she closed her eyes and listened, not with her ears, but with her entire being. She could feel the vibrations from within. A low, rhythmic chanting, the sizzle of liquid hitting hot metal, and beneath it all, a deep, resonant hum of suffering. It was the stone of the castle itself, crying out in pain. This was the heart of the poison. This was the source of the blight. Suddenly she heard footsteps approaching from the main corridor. Panic flared. She flattened herself into a shadowed alcove, holding her breath. Lord Marius swept past, his robes whispering over the flagstones. He carried a covered silver bowl that radiated the same sickening energy as the room. He stopped at the door, produced a key, and unlocked it, slipping inside without a backward glance. Lena waited, her heart pounding. She had found it. She had the proof. Marius was not just a liar. He was actively poisoning the kingdom with some kind of dark magic. She retreated as silently as she had come, her mind reeling. She had to tell Alaric. But how? He trusted his uncle. He would see her accusation as a bitter Omega's revenge. She needed more than just a feeling and a secret location. She needed to know what was inside that room. She needed to expose the lie to the light. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that doing so would put herself, and Finn, in mortal danger. Alaric was in his study, staring at a map of his failing domain, when Gareth entered. His beta's face was pale, his expression deeply troubled. "What is it?" Alaric asked, his tone weary. "I have been thinking about what you told me," Gareth began, choosing his words carefully. "About why you rejected Lena. About Lord Marius's counsel." Alaric grunted, not wanting to rehash the greatest shame of his life. "I did some digging," Gareth continued undeterred, "in the lower archives. I looked into the history of royal mates in your bloodline. For the past 2 centuries, every time an alpha of your line was mated to an omega, the omega died in childbirth or shortly after. Or they were barren. Marius's own grandmother was an omega mated to your great-granduncle. She died, and their line was extinguished." Alaric looked up, his full attention captured. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Lord Marius has a deep familial hatred of omegas. He sees them as a genetic dead end, a weakness that brings ruin. He didn't just advise you based on political strategy. He advised you based on a personal, fanatical prejudice." Gareth took a deep breath. "And there's more. I found records of his acquisitions for the Royal Library. He has been sourcing rare and forbidden texts for years, tomes on blood magic, on leeching life from the land. He has been building an arsenal of dark knowledge right under our noses." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Lena's words about a lie, her certainty that the poison was close to the throne. Marius's hatred, his access to dark magic. "The blight," Alaric whispered, the realization dawning like a black sun. "He created it." "It makes a terrible kind of sense," Gareth agreed. "Weaken the kingdom, weaken you. Make the pack believe you are cursed, and when all hope is lost, he steps in as the savior." Rage, cold and pure, surged through Alaric. He had been manipulated. His kingdom, his people, his own mate. He had sacrificed them all at the altar of his uncle's ambition and hatred. He had been a puppet, and Marius had been pulling the strings. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the stone floor. "Where is he?" "I don't know." He was not in his chambers. At that moment, a frantic pounding erupted at the study door. A guard burst in, his face ashen. "My king." "It's the prince. He's collapsed." Alaric's blood ran cold. He didn't need to ask how. He knew. Marius was no longer content with a slow poisoning of the land. He had moved on to the Heir. Alaric sprinted from the room, a single desperate roar tearing from his throat. He was not just running to his son. He was running toward a war he had unknowingly allowed to fester in the heart of his home. Lena was sitting with Finn, sharing a small cup of sweetened milk before bed, when Lord Marius entered their chambers. The guards had not stopped him. He was the king's uncle, the High Chancellor. His presence immediately filled the room with a cloying, false sweetness that made the hairs on Lena's arms stand up. "My dear lady," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "and the young prince. I hope you are finding your accommodations suitable." "They are," Lena replied, her voice tight. She subtly moved so she was more fully between Marius and her son. "Good, good." Marius's eyes twinkled, a false light in the dim room. He held out a small, ornate box, a small gift for the boy, to welcome him to his new home. Candied dates from the southern provinces, a delicacy. Lena's senses screamed a warning. The box radiated a faint cold energy, the same sickening feeling she'd felt outside the hidden door in the dungeons. "That is very kind of you, my lord, but he has just had his milk. Perhaps another time." "Nonsense," Marius insisted, stepping closer. He opened the box, and a sweet, cloying aroma filled the air. "Just one, for a growing boy." He picked up a glistening date and offered it to Finn. Finn, innocent and trusting, reached for it. "No." Lena's hand shot out, but she was too far away. At that exact moment, the main doors to the chamber burst open. Alaric stood there, his face a mask of fury, but he was across the room. He would never make it in time. Without a second of conscious thought, Alaric acted. He did not run. He launched himself across the room, his body shifting midair. Bone and sinew cracked and reformed, his human form melting away into the massive, terrifying shape of his wolf. He was a blur of black fur and primal rage, landing between Marius and the boy with a ground-shaking impact. But he wasn't fast enough to stop the exchange. As he landed, his body shielding his son, he saw Finn pop the candied date into his mouth. A terrible, strangled cry came from Alaric's wolf form. He whirled on Marius, who looked momentarily shocked by the sheer speed and violence of the transformation. Then Finn made a small choking sound. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the floor. "Finn!" Lena screamed, scrambling to his side. His little body was convulsing, a pale foam frothing at his lips. Alaric let out a roar of pure agony and lunged for Marius. But the poison was already working on the boy, and a second later, a wave of dizziness and nausea hit Alaric. He staggered, his massive wolf form shrinking, faltering. The poison. It wasn't just for the boy, it was tied to the bloodline. By poisoning the son, Marius had poisoned the father. He collapsed onto the floor, his body racked with spasms, the world dissolving into a vortex of pain and darkness. His last conscious thought was of Lena's terrified scream and the triumphant, evil smile on his uncle's face. He had sacrificed his son to save him, and in the end, he had failed them both. The world descended into chaos. Guards rushed in, drawn by the commotion, but they stopped dead, paralyzed by the scene before them. Their king, writhing on the floor in a half-shifted state, the young prince unconscious and seizing beside him, and the High Chancellor, Lord Marius, standing over them with a look of cold triumph. "The Omega is a witch," Marius bellowed, seizing the opportunity. "She has poisoned the king and his heir." "Seize her." Lena didn't hear him. Her entire universe had shrunk to the small, trembling body of her son. She gathered Finn into her arms, his convulsions shaking her to the core. She could feel his life force, his bright little flame, flickering and dimming with terrifying speed. The poison was dark magic. She could sense it, a cold, creeping thing that was devouring him from the inside. Tears streamed down her face, but she forced them back. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had to do something. Conventional healing was useless against this. She needed to fight magic with magic, or something like it. She pressed her forehead to Finn's, her hands cupping his face. She closed her eyes and reached inward, past the fear, past the grief, to the core of her own being. Her power wasn't in healing herbs or chanted spells. It was in connection, in truth, in love. She poured all of her love for her son, a force more powerful than any dark magic, down an invisible conduit between them. She pictured his light, his laughter, his bright silver eyes, and used that image as a shield against the encroaching darkness. "Stay with me, Finn. Mama is here. You are strong. You are loved. Fight." But the poison was too strong. Finn's breathing grew shallow, his seizures weakening into a final, terrifying stillness. She was losing him. A wave of utter despair washed over her. And in that despair, a new, desperate idea took hold. The poison was tied to the bloodline. Alaric was also dying. Their life forces were linked. If she could strengthen the father, maybe it would strengthen the son. Leaving Finn for a moment that felt like an eternity, she crawled to Alaric's side. He was barely conscious, his magnificent wolf spirit trapped and dying within his poisoned human form. The guards were advancing on her now, spurred by Marius's commands. She had seconds. She placed her hands on Alaric's chest over his heart. She felt the weak, stuttering beat. She reached for the mate bond, the frayed, damaged cord that still connected their souls. It was weak, but it was there. Alaric, she whispered, her voice raw with unshed tears. I never stopped loving you. Not for a moment. Our son is proof of our bond. He is the best of both of us. Don't let him win. Don't let the lie that broke us be the thing that kills us. She poured her own energy into him, her own life force, through the channel of the mate bond. It was a desperate, suicidal gamble, but she would give her last breath for her son. She felt a flicker, a response. Deep within him, his wolf heard her. His spirit, battered and poisoned, recognized its mate's call. It was a call to fight, a call to live, a call to protect. Fight, Alaric, she sobbed, pressing down, giving him everything she had. Fight for our son. Deep in the poisoned abyss of his consciousness, Alaric heard her. Lena's voice was a thread of light in an infinite darkness. Her love, her pain, her fierce determination. It cut through the magical venom that was extinguishing his life. Fight for our son. The words were a clarion call to his very soul. He had failed them. He had rejected his mate, abandoned his son, and allowed a traitor to poison his kingdom and his family. He had been ruled by fear and pride for 5 long years. Fear of being seen as weak. Pride that blinded him to the truth. He had to choose. He could surrender to the darkness, let the poison claim him, and accept his failure as his end. Or he could fight. He could choose her. He could choose the son he had only just found. He could choose to believe in a strength that wasn't measured in physical power, but in love and sacrifice. He chose her. With a surge of will that came from the deepest wellspring of his being, he fought back. He grabbed the thread of light she offered and pulled. His wolf, cornered and dying, responded to its alpha's command. It rose, not with a roar of physical rage, but with the unshakable power of a renewed and accepted mate bond. The effect was instantaneous. The bond, once a frayed thread, blazed into a brilliant conduit of power. Lena's energy, her love, her truth, flooded into him, not healing the poison, but giving him the strength to overcome it. On the floor of the chamber, Alaric's body convulsed. But this was not the throe of death. It was the surge of life. With a guttural roar that shook the very stones of the castle, he forced himself to his knees. His eyes, which had been glazed with pain, snapped open, blazing with pure silver light. The half-formed wolf features receded, leaving the man, the king, whole and burning with righteous fury. Marius stared, his mouth agape in disbelief. Impossible! No one survives that poison! Alaric staggered to his feet, his body weak but his spirit unbreakable. He looked past Marius, his gaze locking with Lena's. In that look, 1,000 apologies were given and a universe of forgiveness was offered. Then he turned his burning gaze upon his uncle. You are a traitor to your kingdom, your king, and your blood. Alaric snarled, his voice a low, deadly growl. Marius, realizing his plan had catastrophically failed, drew a concealed dagger. The kingdom needs a strong ruler, not one weakened by a blind Omega. He lunged, not at Alaric, but at Lena, his face twisted in a mask of hate. But Gareth, who had been watching in horrified silence, finally acted. He moved with the swift, brutal efficiency of a beta warrior, intercepting Marius's charge. Steel rang on steel. The guards, seeing their king alive and their high chancellor revealed as a would-be assassin, finally shook off their paralysis and surged forward, surrounding Marius. The fight was short and decisive. Marius was disarmed and subdued, his face a picture of pure, malevolent rage. Alaric ignored the commotion. He stumbled back to Lena's side. She was bent over Finn, her hands once again on her son. With Alaric's life force no longer draining, the life shared between father and son was flowing back into the boy. The color was returning to Finn's cheeks. His breathing, though shallow, was evening out. Alaric dropped to his knees beside them, his hand covering Lena's. "Is he?" Lena looked up, tears of relief now streaming down her face. She gave a small, shaky nod. "He's fighting. He's going to be okay." It was her power that had done this. Not magic, not brute force. Her love, her unwavering belief in their bond. She hadn't been a curse that brought the blight. She was the cure for everything. With Marius imprisoned in the deepest dungeon of the fortress he had tried to steal, a fragile peace settled over the castle. Finn recovered quickly, his youthful resilience aided by the now fully restored bond he shared with his father. Within a day, he was sitting up in bed, demanding stories from his mother and looking at his father with a new, curious respect. Alaric did not leave their side. He had the affairs of the kingdom brought to him, issuing commands from a chair beside Finn's bed. But his attention was truly on the two people he had almost lost. He watched Lena as she cared for their son, his heart aching with the weight of 5 lost years. He saw the quiet efficiency of her movements, the gentle way she soothed Finn's fears, the fierce, protective love that radiated from her. She was magnificent. When Finn was finally asleep, his breathing deep and even, Lena stood and walked to the window, her silhouette framed by the moonlight. Alaric rose and went to her, stopping just behind her. "Lena," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "There are no words." "I'm sorry" is a pebble thrown into a canyon of my own making. She didn't turn. "I don't need your apologies, Alaric. I need to know it won't happen again. I need to know my son is safe. I swear on my life, on my soul," he said, his voice raw. "No one will ever harm either of you again." I was a blind fool, so obsessed with the idea of physical strength that I couldn't see the truest strength of all standing right in front of me. He reached out, his hand hesitating before gently touching her arm. She didn't pull away. The contact was electric, a jolt of warmth and rightness that flowed through them both. The mate bond sang, vibrant and whole. Marius confessed everything. He continued softly. The blight was created with magic that fed on deceit. My rejection of you, the lie that you were a weakness, was the seed from which it all grew. It poisoned the land because the pack's foundation, the bond between its alpha and his mate, was built on a lie. When you spoke the truth of your feelings for me, when I finally accepted it, we healed the foundation. You healed us. Lena finally turned to face him, her sightless eyes seeming to look right through him. And what now? This was the moment. The future of their family, their kingdom, hinged on his answer. He didn't hesitate. He went down on one knee, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to his soulmate. He took her hand in his, bringing it to his lips. "Now," he said, his voice shaking with the depth of his conviction, "I ask you to do what I should have done 5 years ago. Lena of Oakhaven, my fated mate, mother of my heir, savior of my kingdom. Will you accept me? Will you be my queen?" A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but a slow, beautiful smile bloomed on her face. It was the first time he had seen her truly smile, and it was like watching the sun rise after a long, dark night. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Alaric. I will. He rose and gently pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. And to him, she was. He lowered his head, and with the utmost care he claimed her lips in a kiss that was a promise, a prayer, and a new beginning. In the next room, their son slept peacefully, and for the first time in 5 years, the future of Stonefang felt not just hopeful, but bright. The mating ceremony was held a week later in the grand courtyard, the same place where Lena had once been rejected. But today, there was no shame, only celebration. The blight was already receding. The sky seemed bluer, and green shoots were defiantly pushing their way through the once barren soil in the royal gardens. The land was healing because its king and queen were whole. Lena stood beside Alaric on the dais, dressed in silks the color of a dawn sky. She was not the timid, terrified girl she had been. She stood with a quiet confidence, her head held high. Finn stood between them, holding both their hands, his silver eyes shining with pride. Alaric addressed his pack, his voice ringing with a newfound humility and strength. He told them of his failure, of his blindness to true strength. He told them of Lord Marius's treachery and of the lie that had nearly destroyed them all. And then he turned to Lena. I present to you my mate, my queen Lena, he declared, his voice filled with love and reverence. Her heart is the strongest in this kingdom. Her wisdom saved us. She is my better half and our truest strength. He lifted her hand and, before the entire pack, he lowered his head and bit gently into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. The mark was a blaze of heat, a searing, permanent declaration of their bond. It sent a wave of pleasure and profound rightness through Lena, cementing their souls together for all time. A cheer erupted from the assembled pack, a genuine, joyous sound of approval. The old ways of Stonefang began to change. Strength was no longer judged solely by the sword arm, but by the heart. Compassion and wisdom, once seen as soft and unnecessary, were now valued. Lena, the blind queen, became Alaric's most trusted advisor. Chieftains and warriors would come to her, not for battle strategy, but for her uncanny ability to sense the truth of a matter, to mediate disputes, and to see the heart of a person. Her blindness was no longer a flaw, it was her gift, and she used it to help her people thrive. Alaric became a different kind of king. He was still a fierce protector, but his rule was now tempered with the compassion and wisdom he learned from his mate. He became a better father, spending hours with Finn, not just in the training yard, but in the gardens, listening to the stories Lena had taught them both. He was learning to listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart. Their union didn't just save the kingdom, it transformed it. 1 year later, the dominion of Stonefang was unrecognizable. The fields were lush and green, the forests were vibrant with life, and the pack was stronger and more united than ever before. Lena sat on a blanket in the royal gardens, the warm sun on her face. The scent of blooming roses filled the air. She leaned back against the broad, steady chest of her husband, her king. Alaric's arms were wrapped around her, his hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her belly. A short distance away, Finn, now a confident 6-year-old, was practicing his sword forms with Gareth. His movements were quick and sure, but what made Lena's heart swell was the sound of his laughter, free and unburdened, echoing through the peaceful garden. "He has your grace," Alaric murmured, his lips brushing against her hair. "He has your strength," Lena countered softly, a smile playing on her lips, "and his own mischievous spirit." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of their peaceful kingdom and their happy son. "Are you happy, my love?" Alaric asked, his voice still holding a faint trace of the old insecurity, the fear that this perfect life was a dream he might wake from. Lena turned her head, her hand coming up to cup his jaw. Her sightless eyes were full of a light that came from within. I have my son. I have a daughter on the way. And I have a mate who finally sees me for who I am. She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss full of love and contentment. I have never been happier. He held her tighter, his heart full. The blind Omega he had once rejected had not been a flawed omen. She had been a prophecy. She was his salvation, his queen, and the heart of his world. Together, they had rebuilt a kingdom, not on a foundation of unyielding stone, but on the far stronger ground of love, truth, and acceptance. And their story, once a tale of rejection and sorrow, had become the greatest legend the Dominion of Stonefang would ever know.